It's Charter California edition. I'm Brad Pomerantz. We are joined today by Gale Hammons. She was the editor of the editorial page of the Press Enterprise in the Inland Empire, but now she is a communication strategist of Hammons Strategies. We still work well together. I'm glad to have you on the program. It's been a while. I want to speak with you about what's happening in Riverside. In the city of Riverside, there are 4 council elections. The election just passed. And what we saw is in 2 of the races, there were no opponents for the incumbents. In 1 race, there was an opponent for an incumbent. And then in the open seat, only 2 candidates ran in an open seat. And this is Riverside, which is a pretty good city council and a pretty good sized city. What do you make of that, Gale?
Well, this has been quite a topic of conversation in the community.
Yes.
And the perception is, rightly or wrongly, that the council is awash in turmoil and infighting. Some of that may have improved slightly in recent months. But the perception is that people don't want to jump into that and become involved and get in the middle of all that, and might wait for things to calm down before taking their turn at leadership on the council.
Could it be also that, aside from the last year that's been a little rocky, that generally speaking, Riverside has done pretty well when you compare it to San Bernardino, for example, which is coming out of bankruptcy.
Or Moreno Valley.
Or Moreno Valley, which has had indictments. So could it be that, yes, it's been a rocky year, but generally it's not so bad, so let's let it be?
Yes, I think there may be some of that. There may be some of the phenomenon, you know, the saying about Congress where people hate Congress but love their own congressman. Well, I think the council members in Riverside take very good care of their own wards, so some people might think the council as a whole might have some problems and some turmoil, but individual council members may do good.
We also know through the last election that this election was all mail-in ballot, and it was also an off year election. I mean, there's nothing going on. What do you make of the decision of the Riverside City Council to keep its city council election off cycle when the mayor's race, for example, was put on cycle? You know, in Los Angeles, they put their city races on cycle.
Well, part of it was by design, and one of the former councilmen, or maybe more than one, wanted to be able to run for mayor while retaining his council seat, so they wanted to split those 2 cycles off in order to preserve that ability. And the whole low turnout election was also by design because incumbents find it easier to get reelected when they're not on a ballot crowded with members of Congress, and the presidential election and some of the anti-incumbent fervor that often accompanies those races and can trickle down to the council level.
But what about the notion that if you stay off cycle, all attention is paid to that election, and so you don't get lost in a different way? Except
that people are
not voting at all.
They aren't really paying attention. If the only thing on your ballot is a city council ward election and maybe a Measure A, the marijuana dispensary initiative, it just doesn't seem that pressing to many voters.
Let's talk more about the Inland Empire, which for decades had been reliably Republican. But we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years that Riverside County, San Bernardino County is flirting with, if not courting, the Democratic Party. What's your sense of that?
There are definitely pockets of change, and redistricting might play a role in that as well in terms of the elected representatives. California as a whole has been trending Democratic for many years, and Riverside County is perhaps catching up to other parts of the state.
But if you look at the way these counties have been voting, I mean, San Bernardino, it's been going Democratic pretty handily over the last...
Voting in which elections? Are you talking presidential?
That's the point.
Are you talking Congress? Are you?
And so talk to me about that some would argue that schizophrenia that we're seeing in the Inland Empire, where in 2012 in Riverside you see, a very heated race for Congress, Senate, and Assembly. The Takano, Roth, Medina trio, all Democrats, all very tightly contested races, and yet they all won handily when everyone thought these were going to be big contested races. But then 2 years later, you have someone like Pete Aguilar, for example, who's running in a Democratic seat for Congress, and he barely squeaks by, with 2% margin.
And there are a lot of dynamics and variables in each race, and you kind of have to look at them one by one and look at the caliber of the challenger and look at how much money did, say, the DNC put into it, and what kind of campaign was run, what the messaging was. So, and of course, what the demographics in that particular district were. and how those might have shifted. So
let's
there are a lot of factors involved.
Yeah, so let's look forward to 2016, which presumably, when we look at the presidential race, it's unlikely California will be contested, but you never know. You never know what could happen. I want to get a sense from you where you think the Inland Empire plays in the calculation. We will have a U.S. Senate race going on, and who knows what could happen? I mean, we now have two major Democrats running. We have Kamala Harris, Loretta Sanchez. You never know on the Republican side. You know, maybe Rocky Chavez will make some noise, the assemblyman from San Diego. But where do you think the Inland Empire plays in 2016?
I don't think it has much of a role. I mean, just because California is not really in play, and it's highly unlikely the Republicans will take that Senate seat.
Right.
So
let's talk about 2000.
I think we're rather marginalized.
Yeah, let's talk about 2016 generally, though. You know, there are some that argue that there's a big blue wall for 2016 that the Republicans cannot penetrate, and Hillary's going to win, and just, you know, put that in the bank. There are others that would say the Obama factor was really unique in 2008 and 2012, and so this election will be a real race. Where do you come down?
Well, I don't think anything is guaranteed, especially for a candidate as divisive as Hillary Clinton. I mean, people know her, and that cuts both ways because after kind of Obama, no one knew. He ran on hope and change, and no one really knew what to expect. And some people were surprised at what they got. Hillary's a known commodity. She's been around since the 1990s, but then she represents the 1990s as well. And if someone like Marco Rubio were to run against her, that's a strong contrast. Someone who's has a really compelling story in terms of being the son of immigrants and the son of a bartender and a maid, and a Hispanic American candidate for the presidency. I mean, that's a very powerful narrative, and he's much younger, and he stands in stark contrast with respect to, he represents the future.
Sure.
Young Hispanic American, and she represents the 1990s.
So I want to ask you, you know, Rubio has this compelling story. Scott Walker, governor of Wisconsin, also seen as a formidable candidate. He is not a college graduate. And I'm not really sure how that plays. And I want to see what you think. On the one hand, I think that could be devastating to his campaign. On the other hand, most Americans aren't college graduates. So maybe it's a plus. He's not hoity-toity. He's not part of the elite.
I certainly don't consider it a plus, but on the other hand, I don't think it's that big a deal in the scheme of all the variables in terms of how people vote for president. I mean, I think people like him because he stands up to special interests. He takes on the unions. Whether you're pro-union or anti-union, you got to respect a president or a governor, potential president who's willing to stand up to a powerful interest despite detrimental political consequences.
I want to talk about what some would say the sleeping giant, the Latino electorate, which could be awoken by Marco Rubio. Conventional wisdom suggests that Hillary Clinton is going to pick a Latino to be her vice presidential nominee. There is chatter about, I think it's Julian Castro, who is the HUD secretary. I mentioned to you, Eric Garcetti. He's mayor of Los Angeles, 4 million people, bigger than the state of Arkansas. What do you think about that possibility, a Latino somewhere on the ticket, Democrat or Republican for that matter?
She might very well. I mean, she's running a very scripted campaign. I'm sure you've been reading in the news how everything is very carefully controlled, and she's trying to kind of script her way to the presidency and take no risks. So she'll do the safe thing, whatever that might be.
Well, that's what I want to ask you. Is it a risk to nominate as your vice president someone who's Latino that may not be a national figure?
Well, I think it's a plus to nominate someone who's Latino, but the Democrats have such a lean bench. Under the Obama years, the bench has really withered up, and so that's part of the reason there are no challengers. I mean, Martin O'Malley aside, very few challengers.
Bernie Sanders.
To Hillary, so she doesn't have a lot to choose from with respect to a vice presidential nominee.
Her name is Gale Hammons. She's with Hammons Strategies. My name is Brad Pomerantz, Starter California edition.
Listen to me. I am captain of the track team. And if I'm late...
She doesn't really think she's going to get out of here, does she?
Be nice. She's new.
Hello, is anyone there? Ugh!
Wow. Even from our standards, you look awful.
Oh, sweetie, what happened?
Me? My friend Becky got to talk to this super cute boy, and I tried to act like I wasn't jealous, but I so totally was. And then out of nowhere, this concrete barrier just popped up. Maybe it was a semi.
You mean you were driving?
Yeah. I mean, I know the whole eyes on the road thing, but this was a super important text. Maybe you have to know, Becky.
Texting? Great.
But it was only like 5 seconds, and I'm a really, really fast texter, so it wasn't even a big deal. Actually, has she texted me back yet? Wow, I get like no bars in this place. I wonder if they have Wi-Fi here.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.